Hi, I'm Derrick Jensen. This is Resistance Radio on the Progressive Radio Network. My guest today is Helen Linehan. He's an Irish television comedy writer and director who, often in partnership with Arthur Mathews, has written or co-written a string of successful television comedies. He's best known for creating or co-creating the sitcoms Father Ted, Black Books, The IT Crowd, and Motherland. He's been married to Helen Linehan since 2004. They have 2 children. So first, thank you for your work in the world, and second, thank you for being on the program.
Thanks, Derek. Very happy to be here.
So you have been involved in something of a controversy the last bit. Do you want to talk about that?
Yeah, I kind of decided a few months ago to jump with both feet into the debate around gender identity, trans issues, and women's rights. Basically, I've gotten into a lot of trouble for highlighting some of the conflicts between those 3 forces, or 2 forces. It's been quite a wild, couple of months.
So, can you talk a little bit about the conflicts between those groups and what's at the core of it, and also, what have been, and what are some of the sort of, perhaps surprising public discussions that are had over this. Public discussions that aren't had, as the case may be.
Yeah, I find it extraordinary that I often see something quite amazing that's happened. The latest is this Jonathan Yaniv guy. You witness some of these things and you post about them. And in the past, I've been familiar with Twitter's kind of ripple effect, that if you speak about something, then you can often see, maybe not because of you, but often you can see that subject matter reflected in the wider, list of people you're following on Twitter. You know, it's one of the 3 or 4 things people are talking about every day, you know, but with this, it's crickets. You don't, unless it's the gender critical women and feminists that I've been following, people simply don't speak about it. And I do find it extraordinary. I really do. I can understand wanting to keep your head low, because of the abuse that's often meted out against people who try and talk about these things. But what I can't understand is, you know, once there has been a kind of piling up of incidents and things that are quite obviously either unfair or misogynist or hateful, I'm very, very surprised that more people aren't at least talking about why we're not allowed to talk about it, you know.
So you mentioned a person's name, and let's get some specifics on some of the craziness that's happening out there.
Yes.
The person's name, this has to do with, well, you can tell the story of this person wanting his genitals. Anyway, go ahead.
Yes. Well, Jonathan Yaniv is a guy, I think he's Canadian, and he, runs a Twitter feed called Trusted Nerd, I think. The photograph of him on his own Twitter feed is, you know, a guy with a pair of Google glasses on, smiling at the camera. And this is someone who apparently is also known as Jessica and has been writing to women, these are not women who are part of any larger, group. They're just, women working from home, as massage therapists, and demanding that they wax his genitalia, which are male genitalia. So these women I'm sure very respectfully apologized and said no, because they only do women. They only work with women. And now he's suing them. He's suing about 16 of them. I think 16 is the number. Not only that, but he seems to be successfully getting women taken off Twitter for talking about it. His biggest victim is Megan Murphy, a respected feminist worldwide who's just been taken off Twitter for calling him him. And here's the interesting thing. She called him before Twitter introduced their new rules. So it was a historical offense that they've just now decided that she's guilty of. It's the most extraordinary thing. I've never seen anything like it.
So just to be clear, there's a male who wanted females to touch his genitals, and when they didn't, he sued them. And then when other women call him he, then they are kicked off various platforms.
Yeah, that's essentially it.
And doesn't that seem kind of crazy to you?
Oh yeah, I mean, I have to say this latest example, it really knocked me back, because I kind of thought, well, eventually the fever will break and people will realize that this is just wrong. But the fact that not only did Twitter, ban her, but when she went to, what's the word, protest, the decision, they said, no mistake, permanent ban for that, and it bears out, my experience, which is that I think that there are people within the, trans movement, and I've always said this has been my position from the beginning, that there are people within the trans movement, fetishists, con men, and simply abusive misogynists who are basically using the whole discussion as cover. It has afforded them a chance to dump on women in a way that, Gamergate, the previous misogynist anti-woman campaign, could only have dreamed of. And in fact, I think this is the most successful. I would say this is the most successful front in the war on women that I've ever seen. I don't think there's anything that comes close.
Well, I think I would agree with that or I certainly would agree with that in that these days, even, for example, midwives associations are no longer allowed to talk about pregnant mothers. They're no longer talking about pregnant women. They're no longer allowed to talk about mothers. This is really about erasing, and women are no longer allowed to talk about, I saw this article the other day, that talked about, menstruators. It didn't talk about women. It talked about menstruators. And
yes.
So the reality of women's, the women are no longer, are being banned or are being censured for speaking of women's reality.
Yeah, exactly. And it's making it, boxing women into a smaller and smaller, space, until there's no space for them. My favorite example is the, rape crisis center that was closed in Glasgow because they refused to allow men in. They obviously have a lot of, women who are vulnerable and, would like private spaces away from men. The Scottish government wouldn't give them the funding unless they allowed men. So that's a rape crisis center that's closed down now because of this, and I sometimes, I sometimes get into arguments with people who say, women will notice this and they will fight back and they will never let it happen. And my argument is it is happening. It has happened. And the effects are already being felt by vulnerable people, like the obvious examples, Karen White recently, who sexually assaulted some women in prison, the various pedophiles who are identifying as women, not only to get easier access to men, but also to children, but also to to kind of cover their tracks when they're caught, and to get to receive kind of more slightly gentler treatment when they're in prison. I mean, there's all sorts of obvious consequences to some of these ridiculous positions that are being floated as if they're just fun thought experiments, but they have real life consequences, and they're already being felt. I mean, one of the main, sorry, I'm ranting now, Derek, but one of the things for me that it comes down, I often, this is often the when people are really pressuring me to stop, because that's what I get all the time. Most people want me to stop. Friends and enemies, they all want me to shut up about it. My friends, because they think that it's beginning to define me, and my enemies because they just don't want me to talk about it. They don't want people's consciousness to be raised about this stuff. But the thing I keep coming back to is there was one particular guy who I'm going to see if I can just quickly call him up, who was his name is Jacinta Brooks. And I really recommend you look up Jacinta Brooks, especially the Metro piece, which is an English newspaper. And I'm not sure whether they've changed it recently, but the whole, his real name is Duncan Smart. He looks like, Bill Sykes from Oliver. He is a huge guy, obviously a guy. He even has like a 3-day beard growth on his face. And all through this piece in the Metro, he's referred to as she. And my argument to all my friends and the people who love me and are worried about me for getting involved in such a inflammatory discussion, my argument is I cannot write comedy in a world where a bloke like that is called she all through a newspaper article. Because it is the fundamental basis of reality. It's like 2 + 2 = 4. Comedy is not possible in that world. And I would argue that most forms of journalism, most forms of, trying to relay what life is like in another form, whether it be a novel or whatever it happens to be, these things are no longer possible in a world as insane as that. So for me, I feel like I'm defending my own sanity, because if I'm living in a world like that, I will go nuts.
Well, that's one of the reasons I really wanted to talk to you, is because words are our vocations, words are our life, and words are our art, and words mean something. And one of the things that I have found completely horrifying about this entire discussion, apart from the rank misogyny, not this discussion, but the larger cultural discussion, is the fact that laws are being changed, and the words, they're being changed upon self-identification, which self-identification is meaningless in all cases. I can self-define as a cricket player, even though I have never even actually seen a cricket match, but I can self-identify as a cricket player, but that doesn't make me one. Or, when I get in these discussions, I will ask, they will say, like in the New York Times, it will say that someone who is a male, they'll say they're a female. And it's like, okay, define female, define woman. And, woman is defined as an adult human female. And if you ask somebody, someone who is promoting the transgender ideology to define woman, they can't do it without it being tautological and non-verifiable / falsifiable. And that's what any definition is. If I ask you to define a square, you make a definition. You can't say a square is something that looks like a square. You can't say a square is something I call a square, because that's not a definition. But that's routinely what happens in this, and I can't believe that mainstream journalists, as much as I have gone after them over all the years for all of the absurdities they can say, I can't believe that they push an ideology. It's like writer, Stephen King gave a definition of a writer, and we can disagree with his definition, but his definition is a writer is someone who has created has written an essay or story or something, and then they received a check for this essay, and they put the check in the bank, and then use that check to pay their power bill.
Yeah, I like that definition.
And we can disagree with his definition, but the fact is it's a definition because it's not tautological, and it is verifiable/falsifiable. And that's one of the things that, as well as destroying women's rights, this is destroying language.
Yeah, exactly. And it's, once you start to degrade language and the things that language mean, then the people who are going to flourish are the people who understand the deliberately obscure uses of the language, for me, one of the reasons I think that the you hear no debate, accompanied by, or kind of spouted by a lot of, trans activists, no debate. It's not because they think that, the debate is evil. It's because they know that they will be made fools of if they get into a TV studio or a radio discussion with anyone who knows what they're talking about and isn't frightened of them. The positions they hold are so utterly absurd, so disgraceful and unfair, and like my favorite example, Pippa Bunce, who recently won, businesswoman, got into a list of top 100 businesswomen. Pippa Bunce is a cross-dresser who some days of the week doesn't even dress as a woman. He just, Monday to Wednesday dresses as a woman, the rest of the week dresses as a man. And they are literally saying that he is literally a woman, a cross-dresser who doesn't even do it full time, is the same sex as my wife and daughter. If you get that into a TV studio or a radio discussion program and you start talking about it, you're dead, and that is why they say no debate, because their high priests will immediately be exposed as frauds.
And it's one of the things I find, okay, so I have a friend who has recently kicked off Facebook for saying that, for simply giving the statistics on male violence against women. That's it. Wow. And she got kicked off Facebook. And she got banned for a while. And she came back and she said, I've learned my lesson. I'm going to be careful now, and I'm not going to give statistics on male violence against women. Which is the point, of course.
Yeah.
And can we throw out a few more of the absurdities? I'll throw one out and then just throw some more out if you'd like. One of them is that it is called hate speech to say that the penis is a male organ, or it is hate speech to say that women don't have penises. Those have been called hate speech. Yeah. Do you have some other examples that you'd like to throw out, or other examples of just some of the? I don't think. Oh, I'm going to throw out one more, which is just appalls me that even I live in a fairly conservative county in California, and even this county, because this is a state rule, if the boys and girls, if they go on a trip, an overnight trip, if there is a male who identifies as transgender, that person will be housed with the girls, and here's the point, the parents of the girls cannot be told by the school.
Oh yeah, no, we have that here. There's a woman called, Helen, I'm so sorry, I can't remember your second name, but there's a woman, I'll check it out, but, Helen, I think it's Helen White over, no, I'm thinking of that other story. No, well anyway, Helen, whose name I will search as we, hold on a second, let me, you edit this, I hope. Oh yeah, I got it. It's Helen Watts. Her name is Helen Watts. And she was a Girl Guide leader over here. Girl Guides, I guess, I don't know if this is the same equivalent over there.
Girl Scout, probably.
Girl Scout, yeah, Girl Guides over here. And she raised safeguarding concerns about exactly this policy. And it's very interesting to me that the policy is the same in where you are as it is here. Boys identifying as women would be housed with the girls, and so would the teachers. And she raised concerns, and for that she received the kind of the worst thing they can do to you, which is they expelled her from the Girl Guides. I mean, as I say, when I have these arguments with my friends where they say women won't stand for this, I point to things like this and I say it's already happening. It has happened, and we're already, we already need to catch up with all this stuff, But that's a brilliant example. I mean, that's just obviously ridiculous, and dangerous, and obviously ripe for exploitation by child abusers, it's also uncomfortable for girls who are going through, who might be going through puberty and stuff like that, would like to do that in private, but they are actually being told that they must kind of, shut up about their discomfort, shut up about their desire for privacy and put up with it. And if they don't, they are bigots. It's just extraordinary to me. The other example that I just find it amazing that there's not more of a scandal about this and that more people aren't speaking about this is women's sport. Rachel McKinnon, the cyclist who has been, tearing up the women's cycling, records because he's a man. He's a man who is taking part in all these races that were made. The reason we have segregation in sports is so that women have a fair playing field. And that's just being taken away by people like Rachel McKinnon. There's a guy called Hannah Mounsey. Sorry, I'm misgendering all over the place. I better be really careful. But
that's hate speech.
Hannah Mounsey in Australia broke a woman's leg and is still playing rugby, a women's rugby, and you have to ask yourself as well, there's a question about these people's character as well. Like, if you are physically, you got your, extra levels of testosterone, you've got the increased body density, all of these things. If you have all of these things and you still, want to compete against women, you're a sociopath, because most people who want to compete, they want to do so because they want to test themselves against, similar people and feel that they were the best and come out on top. But if you are doing it to a group of people who you have an advantage over, then there's something deeply wrong with you. And it's not just, it's not dysphoria,
Yeah, why don't we go ahead and have them be trans age as well, and then they can play against junior high school students.
Well, isn't there that famous photograph of the 50-year-old guy with all these young girls in a basketball team? I mean, you see these photographs, and when you share them, there's an interesting thing that is possibly for another conversation, Derek. But there's an interesting aspect to all this that if you share these stories, if you spread them and make people aware of them, you somehow look a bit crazy because you see a photograph of someone like Hannah Mounsey with all these women who are like half his size trying to bring him down in a rugby match, and you think that someone must be being just unnecessarily satirical or something.
It's a Monty Python sketch.
Yeah, it doesn't feel real, but then, you have to point it out. You have to say, no, this is real. This is a real person and they're really doing it. These are real women who are having real places taken from them by a man, and I refuse to believe that, I think that there are, people, I think gender dysphoria is a very real thing. I'm friends online with a lot of, trans women who are gender critical, and, they believe themselves to be men who suffer from gender dysphoria. That's how they define it. But the new definition, it doesn't really, you don't have to have dysphoria. You just have to have a feeling, like a little kind of, I don't know, just a fancy, actually, maybe we better not get into this. This is getting into very dangerous territory, Derek. Can you cut out that last bit, actually?
This is, well, it's true, though, that there's only self-identification. And,
well, I'll give you an example.
I guess
Jess Bradley, who was the kind of trans woman who was in the NUS. They got caught exposing themselves, flashing their penis in at work. And it's like, well, what kind of gender dysphoria is it where you're also a flasher? It just doesn't make sense. It doesn't make sense.
And we end up with absurdities like a newspaper could say that she flashed her penis.
Yes,
which breaks my brain.
And absurdities that where pedophilia, which is basically a male crime first and foremost. I know there's a few outliers who are female who are pedophiles, but generally it's a male crime, and that is now the figures for female pedophilia are going up now because of pedophiles who identify as women. It's insane. And it's funny, but you do sit here and I hear myself talking about it, and you do sound crazy. You do sound crazy because none of this stuff sounds possible, but it's all happening. And it just confuses me that more people aren't as angry about it as I am.
So how did this come to pass that we can talk about men who are quite big playing women's rugby with a straight face, and how did the New York Times get so they can talk about the female penis? How did we get here, and how do we get away from this place?
I don't know. I mean, I think I do think that there is a couple of things at play. One is social contagion, obviously. I think that has a lot to do with it, but I also think there is a element of social engineering, because I noticed that a lot of the people who are trying to shut down debate and who are framing every concern that women have as hate speech and all this sort of thing, they're often people who are involved in tech in some way. I know, you get someone like Amy Challoner who had something to do with a blocking tool, over here. She's still, on the trans advisory board at Stonewall, and she boasted about having a block list that blocked something like 50,000 women. So there's all these people who think that they think they're being good by joining up with a block list. But what they don't realize is that the block list is not just taking in, I don't know, right wingers or whatever it is, but it's taking in, left wing women, it's taking in older women, it's taking in feminists, lesbians, it's taking in, anyone that Amy Challoner and her friends decide is, someone they don't want to be hearing from. So you get a whole kind of chunk of the population who just disappear, disappear from your online experience, that's got to have an effect.
Is Amy Challoner the one the young boy whose father, and you don't have to agree with the quote misgendering, but anyway, is that the young boy?
Yeah, that's you're thinking of the right one. Yeah.
Whose father was torturing a young girl up in the attic.
Yeah, he recently got 22 years for it. And here's the thing, Derek. This is the thing. Another thing that
why can't we talk about that in public?
Well, here's an interesting aspect to it. As I say, Amy Challoner is on the board of Stonewall, and Stonewall advised the Girl Guides on their trans policy. You know, so at the very least, I mean, you know, obviously, you don't want to blame someone for the sins of their father, but Amy Challoner continued to employ him as an election agent after he was charged. So she knew about the charges, and even with that, she didn't withdraw herself from that position. You know, he presumably spoke to her about safeguarding issues. Why is she still giving advice to Stonewall? You know, it's just mind blowing to me how out in the open all this stuff is. And how shameless they are about it, you know?
So what do those of us who care about language, and what do those of us who care about women's sports, women's rape crisis centers, what do we do?
I am getting a little bit exhausted from the isolation of it, you know, of talking about it, you know. I said today, you know, all these church mice out there on Twitter who have opinions on everything under the sun except this subject. Where are they, you know? I mean, I understand you don't want to be subject to the kind of, harassment that me and my family have received, but surely, you know, I mean, one of the reasons I did this was because I wanted to kind of, I realized I didn't have any work on, so there was nothing they could try and use a letter writing campaign or like that to shut me down. I knew that I could take a few hits, you know, but I was hoping that once I'd taken a few hits, other people would say, oh no, hang on a second, you know, Glitter isn't saying anything. Sorry, that's my Twitter name. Glitter isn't saying anything, controversial here. He's just saying that, you know, women need private spaces. Their sports need to be segregated because otherwise it's unfair. They need to be able to talk about health issues that affect only women. These aren't controversial. These are not controversial positions. And yet people are refusing to stand up and take a stand and talk about them, you know, and I did think by now a few more people might have joined in, but no, it's crickets out there.
You know, it's extraordinary how this is really a forbidden topic that, you know, I've written books about bringing down civilization, for crying out loud. And I've written books about, militant resistance to capitalism. I've written books about all sorts of controversial topics. And I recently had a book that, was pulled by the publisher because I dared to critique queer theory and transgender ideology as a small part of a larger book. And this same publisher had published all sorts of other controversial topics, but this is a topic that it's the third rail on the subway. If you touch it, you die.
Yeah.
And I find it just, it's like a friend of mine says that if you want to know what is the real power behind society, you find what you cannot talk about, and what you cannot talk about is male power.
Yeah, exactly. That's very well put, I think. That's it.
Well, it was said by a woman.
Yeah.
But it's extraordinary. You know, Megan Murphy recently lost her publisher over this. It is the silencing. So we only have a couple minutes left, like 5 minutes left, and I think I mean, you can focus on whatever you want to finish, but one thing I might like you to do is, because you and I are both, discourse is our our work, and can you talk for a minute about a bit more about the silencing and about the fact that this is what does it mean for discourse when there is a subject like this that is a third rail, that if you touch, you die. Oh, wait, I want to say one more thing, which is my introduction to this whole topic was that I'm part of a group called Deep Green Resistance that I helped found it. And at one point we were going to have a conference, and the women were going to sleep where the women were going to sleep, and the men were going to sleep where the men were going to sleep. And and if anybody wanted to sleep together, we didn't care. But it's like, if women want a segregated space, they can have it. And this male who identified as transgender, basically as a provocation, said that he wanted to join the group and then come. And we said, that's fine, and we will call you by, the name that you choose to be called by, but we won't call you she, and also you can't sleep with the women. Because the women made that decision. That's all fine. I didn't think it was particularly controversial. But within a week, I had received scores of death threats. The women in DGR had received scores of rape and death threats. People threatened to murder their children. They threatened to burn down their houses. Yeah. I found it absolutely, I was kind of stunned. I didn't think it was particularly controversial. It's like, yeah, you can wear a dress, you can wear whatever you want, I don't care, but you can't sleep with women. And boom, then. Yeah. So I guess a couple of things. Can you talk a little bit about the harassment, and then can you talk a little bit about the what this means for those of us who care about discourse?
Well, since I made the decision to start talking about this, I knew there would be pushback from all sorts of areas. But what I didn't quite realize was it goes from people who are ideologically opposed to what you're saying, telling you to stop. But then it starts to kind of bleed into people who agree with you, telling you to stop. Most people online have been very happy to have me on their side and speaking up. But you do get, I don't know, people do get very, very nervous, because it as you say, it's like putting your hand on a flamethrower. The opposition is so extreme and so frightening that eventually everyone is asking you to stop, but, my feeling is that I can't because it's too important, and it's too important to the women in my life, and it's too important to me, how can I ignore something that I say it to people? I say, I'm now in a position where I can answer the question honestly of, if you were around at the time of something terrible happening, like Nazism or whatever it happened to be, would you be one of the people who said, no, this is wrong, despite being opposed? I feel happy in myself that I've been one of the people standing up and saying, no, this is wrong, despite everyone telling me not to do it. I don't know, as far as what it does for discourse, I don't know. Megan Murphy being banned from Twitter for calling Jonathan Yaniv him, that for me is a really bad sign, because that's a retroactive ban, that is permanent as well. That to me basically is Twitter or Twitter's engineers or whoever it is behind the decision saying, we will shut down anyone who disagrees with this ideology, through any means we can use, through every means we can use. So I don't know. Maybe it'll be a good thing, because I don't think in the end, Twitter can survive with that type of rule, and I think it might mean the end of the platform, which really would be a net gain for humanity in the end. Even though I did love what it gave us. I do think overall it's been a negative.
Right. So we've got like 1 minute left. Is there anything that you would like to, is there any one thing you would like to leave listeners with?
Yeah, I just want people to remember that there's strength in numbers, and there's safety in numbers, and when things are wrong, you should be allowed to point out that they're wrong, because if you don't point it out now when it's affecting other people, then you won't be able to, you won't have a defense against it when it happens to you. I mean, often people, the thing I can easily see happening, because I've had experience with these type of people already, is, someone in a changing room, a man walks in, absolutely, no indication that he's a woman in any way. The woman challenges it. The man says, no, I'm sorry, I'm a woman. This is my female beard. This is my female penis, and, you're guilty of hate speech, if you don't think that's gonna happen, I don't know what world you're living in, because it's already happened.
And the last thing I want to say on this is I want to do a quote by Andrea Dworkin, and then if you could respond to it very briefly. I love this quote, and it has to do with everything we're talking about. She said, "Those of us who love reading and writing believe that being a writer is a sacred trust. It means telling the truth. It means being incorruptible. It means not being afraid and never lying." So I would like to thank you for standing up for women, and I would like to thank you for standing up for truth.
Oh, well, thank you very much, Derek. That means a lot. I hope I didn't come off too ranty.
No, it's all great. So, I would like to thank listeners for listening. I would like to thank you for speaking the truth. My guest today has been Graham Linehan. This is Derrick Jensen for Resistance Radio on the Progressive Radio Network.